14 days. That is how long the ceasefire lasted before Tehran authorized a kinetic strike on the Fujairah petrochemical terminal in the United Arab Emirates. Since that moment, the geopolitical calculus in the Persian Gulf has shifted from a fragile, negotiated truce to an active, escalating military engagement. $450 million in revenue is being lost by the Iranian regime every single day due to the ongoing naval standoff. With 2,000 commercial vessels trapped in the heat and 20,000 civilian sailors running out of food and water, the situation has moved beyond diplomatic brinkmanship. It is now a matter of unilateral humanitarian intervention and, inevitably, overwhelming kinetic response. The narrative being peddled by international diplomats in Geneva and Washington's political establishment that the Middle East is entering a period of stabilization is mathematically incorrect. It is a fabricated story designed to soothe markets that are already reacting to the reality of the situation. The ceasefire is not just fractured, it is functionally dead. When the IRGC authorized the missile strikes against the UAE, they didn't just attack a target, they attacked the bypass valve of the entire regional economy. And in doing so, they have triggered a response from the United States that is dismantling their remaining influence with clinical, surgical precision. To understand the scale of this conflict, we have to move past the rhetoric and look at the logistics. For 3 weeks, the Strait of Hormuz was effectively turned into the largest maritime hostage situation in the 21st century. 2,000 commercial vessels, supertankers, container ships, bulk carriers were rendered immobile, their crews facing 110-degree temperatures with dwindling supplies. The Iranian regime's strategy was clear: leverage the global supply chain, use neutral civilians as a bargaining chip, and force the United States into a negotiation position that would yield sanctions relief. The strategy failed because it relied on the assumption that the U.S. would prioritize diplomatic continuity over maritime security. The new American administration proved that assumption wrong. Operation Project Freedom was not a diplomatic mission. It was a unilateral military operation to enforce the freedom of navigation. By establishing mine-free lanes and escorting these 2,000 vessels out of the strike zone, the U.S. Navy achieved a tactical victory that effectively neutralized Iran's primary geopolitical weapon. They didn't have to bomb Tehran to cripple the regime. They simply removed the leverage that the regime was holding over the international community. When the Iranian leadership realized their bargaining chips were being escorted out of the strait by guided missile destroyers and mine-sweeping drones, their reaction was not calculated, it was impulsive. This is where the tactical analysis of the IRGC becomes critical. They are no longer operating from a position of strategic depth. They are operating from a position of profound systemic panic. When a government loses its leverage, it lashes out. That is exactly what we witnessed when the cruise missiles and drones impacted the Fujairah petrochemical site. The choice of Fujairah was not random. It was a targeted economic strike. Fujairah is the UAE's pressure valve. It is the geographic bypass that allows oil to be exported without going through the Strait of Hormuz. By targeting it, the IRGC was attempting to punish the UAE for its recent pivot away from OPEC. The UAE had signaled that it was prepared to break with cartel quotas and increase production, a move that would crash global oil prices and effectively bankrupt the Iranian state. The missile strike was a desperate, asymmetric reaction to the threat of economic ruin. It was the act of a regime that knows its revenue stream is being permanently severed. The reality of the military mismatch is stark. Following the strike, Iranian state media immediately pushed a narrative of triumph, claiming they had engaged and severely damaged a United States Navy frigate. The reality is that the United States Navy has not operated an active frigate since 2015. This is the level of propaganda being disseminated to the Iranian public, a desperate attempt to maintain internal control through fabrications. This follows a pattern established weeks ago when the regime disseminated AI-generated images of downed American B-2 bombers. These are not the actions of a confident, secure government. These are the actions of a regime trying to prevent internal collapse by projecting a strength that does not exist on the ground. The U.S. Department of Defense and U.S. Central Command have provided a clear assessment of the Iranian naval capacity. The term Mosquito Navy has become the standard descriptor for the remnants of the IRGC sea assets. This is not hyperbole. It is a technical assessment of a fleet that has had its primary command and control centers, coastal radar installations, and strategic battle lines systematically neutralized over the last several months. What remains is a ragtag collection of fast attack craft and short-range rockets, incapable of challenging U.S. naval dominance in the Gulf. The Strait of Hormuz is currently under absolute, uncontested American control. By breaking the ceasefire and striking the UAE, Iran has provided the specific casus belli required for a decisive kinetic response. There are no more warnings to be issued. The U.S. military has finalized the target packages. CENTCOM commanders have already presented the administration with immediate, overwhelming strike options that go far beyond the scope of previous operations. We are talking about the full-scale neutralization of remaining military infrastructure, including advanced missile launchers and internal command bunkers. The disconnect between the Iranian leadership and the reality of their situation is profound. The generals and the clerics are currently sheltering in deeply reinforced subterranean facilities, insulated from the external world. They are fundamentally disconnected from the domestic situation inside Iran, where inflation has surged beyond 50%, the currency has effectively collapsed, and the social contract is in tatters. They are banking on a high tolerance for pain from their population, expecting the Iranian people to endure a kinetic campaign the same way they endured the 1980s. This assumption is flawed because it ignores the primary driver of loyalty in any military: compensation and supply. How do you command an army that has not been paid in months? How do you maintain unit cohesion when the rank-and-file soldiers are watching their families starve because the regime destroyed the currency? The loyalty of the Iranian military is not to the supreme leader, it is to the basic survival of their families. That survival is currently threatened by the regime's own economic policy. The missile strike on Fujairah was a miscalculation of catastrophic proportions. It did not project strength, it revealed the regime's desperation. It did not disrupt the U.S. strategy. It accelerated the timeline for kinetic retaliation. The United States is no longer operating under the constraints of a truce. The target lists are populated, the hypersonic assets are in theater, and the decision to escalate has already been made at the highest levels of the Pentagon. We are looking at a 72-hour window that will likely define the future of the region. The question is not whether the U.S. will retaliate, but how extensive that retaliation will be. Will the IRGC suffer a total kinetic decapitation? Will the unpaid military refuse to follow orders? Will the UAE strike force a broader regional conflict? The mainstream media will attempt to categorize this as an escalation to induce panic. This is an analytical error. This is a correction. It is the final stage of a multi-month operation to dismantle a regime that has utilized terrorism as a state-sponsored industry for 4 decades. The logic is simple. When the deterrence of the ceasefire is discarded by the aggressor, the only remaining option is the imposition of costs. The Iranian regime is now facing the imposition of costs at the highest possible level. Their naval capability is neutralized. Their economic leverage is dismantled. Their propaganda is transparently false. And their internal cohesion is being eroded by the very starvation they forced upon their own people. The decision to strike the UAE was the final signal that the regime has ceased to function as a rational actor. When a state ceases to be rational, it loses the protection of diplomatic norms. The United States is currently holding the initiative. Operation Project Freedom proved that the U.S. can dictate the maritime conditions of the Gulf without needing a massive ground presence. The next phase will be the enforcement of a permanent security architecture in the region, one that does not require the permission of the Iranian regime. The internal dynamics of the IRGC are also worth noting. The factionalism that we discussed previously is only exacerbated by this strike. There are likely elements within the Iranian command structure who oppose this attack, understanding that it would trigger the exact kinetic response they have been trying to avoid for months. By authorizing the strike, the hardliners have likely fractured the remaining unity of the IRGC High Command, creating internal friction that will likely lead to further leaks, sabotage, and potential defections. This is the end of the line. The Iranian regime has exhausted its diplomatic options, its economic options, and its military options. What remains is a choice between total capitulation, which the regime is clearly unwilling to accept, or total kinetic neutralization. By choosing the latter, they have effectively signed their own death warrant. The retaliation will not be localized, it will be comprehensive. The infrastructure of the IRGC, from the missile launch facilities to the internal intelligence headquarters, is currently being mapped for total destruction. This is not a prediction, it is an assessment of military and economic reality. The regime's bunker-based leadership is betting that the U.S. will be deterred by the risk of regional escalation. They are wrong. They are operating on 20th century logic in a 21st century battlefield. The U.S. has demonstrated that it can operate with precision, speed, and total dominance without triggering the regional apocalypse that Tehran uses as its final defensive argument. The strike on the UAE was not a show of power. It was a confession of weakness. It was an admission that the Iranian regime has nothing left in its arsenal except for the ability to cause temporary localized damage that will be paid for 10 times over in the coming days. The regime is attempting to utilize digital sleeper cells and bot networks to manipulate public perception and spread doubt about the effectiveness of this response. They are pouring millions into propaganda to try and convince you that the United States is the one at risk. Do not fall for it. The data is clear. The regime's economy is vaporized. Its navy is a mosquito fleet, and its military is unpaid and demoralized. The outcome is not in doubt. Stay tuned to the developments in the next 72 hours. The kinetic response is imminent. The map of the region is changing, and the regime in Tehran is running out of time. If you appreciate the analytical breakdown of this conflict, engage with the content. The regime's propaganda networks are flooding algorithms to suppress the truth. Your engagement, liking, sharing, subscribing, is the only way to ensure the objective reality of this situation reaches a wider audience. Hit the notification bell so you receive the breaking updates as the retaliation unfolds. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and never stop questioning the official narrative. I'll see you in the next one.